In Rotherham, South Yorkshire, a seemingly ordinary town, a horrifying truth, long hidden in the shadows, finally surfaced, shaking the community to its core. The revelation sent shockwaves throughout the nation. The year was 2014. Professor Alexis Jay's meticulously researched report revealed a dark secret that had been festering for years. The report chillingly detailed that at least 1,400 vulnerable children were systematically and horrifically sexually exploited, their innocence stolen in the very places they should have felt safe. This abuse occurred between 1997 and 2013, a staggering 16-year period of unimaginable suffering. These were not isolated incidents of opportunistic crime, but something far more sinister. It was systematic abuse perpetrated by organized gangs who preyed on the vulnerable, operating with chilling impunity. They acted with impunity, seemingly untouchable by the very authorities meant to protect the innocent. Young girls, some as young as 11 years old, barely on the cusp of adolescence, were deliberately groomed, their trust manipulated and exploited. They were trafficked across town, across county lines, their lives controlled by their abusers, and they were subjected to brutal violence, both physical and emotional, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Shockingly, authorities had known about these crimes for years, whispers and warnings circulating within the system. Yet they failed to act decisively, their inaction a damning indictment of a broken system. They were betraying the very children they were sworn to protect, failing in their most fundamental duty. The report exposed a deep-seated culture of denial, a willful blindness to the suffering of these children. It revealed a catastrophic institutional failure at every level, from social services to law enforcement. The rot had spread deep within the police force and the local council, compromising their ability to safeguard the vulnerable. Brave journalists and courageous whistleblowers had tried to warn of the escalating abuse, raising the alarm despite facing resistance and intimidation. But it took Professor Jay's comprehensive and irrefutable findings to finally force the nation to confront the full horror of what had happened in Rotherham. Rotherham became a symbol of national disgrace, a stain on the conscience of the nation. The report sparked investigations into similar failures in towns and cities across the United Kingdom, revealing a far wider problem than anyone had imagined. The scandal forced Britain to reckon with its own failures, to confront the uncomfortable truth. It was a reckoning with a catastrophic failure to protect its most vulnerable children, a failure that demanded accountability. It was the first domino to fall, exposing a deeply troubling pattern of abuse and systemic neglect that stretched nationwide, demanding a complete overhaul of child protection services. Grooming gangs are organized groups often operating in the shadows who systematically target and exploit vulnerable children, preying on their innocence and trust. Their method is calculated, a deliberate and insidious strategy. They offer gifts, attention, seemingly harmless gestures at first, and a false sense of belonging, creating a web of deceit that's hard to escape. This is especially true for children who feel isolated, overlooked or misunderstood. Groomers identify and exploit vulnerabilities, spotting the cracks in a child's life. They focus on building trust while isolating victims from real support networks like family and friends. The child becomes dependent, emotionally and psychologically. They end up seeing the abuser as their only friend, their confidant, the only one who understands. Once trapped, the abuse escalates, the grooming process complete. Control, coercion and violence replace kindness, revealing the true nature of the predator. Victims are often shared among gang members, treated as objects, and tragically they are trafficked for sexual abuse, sold and traded like property. Threats and intimidation become the norm, a constant cloud hanging over the victim. This keeps them silent and powerless, trapped in a cycle of fear and abuse. These gangs operate with a shared ideology, a twisted belief system that justifies their actions. They are treating children as commodities, disposable objects to be used and discarded. Their organization and community ties provide a shield, making them difficult to expose. This complex criminal network makes them incredibly difficult to dismantle, requiring a coordinated effort. This is not just child abuse, it's far more sinister. It's organised criminal exploitation on a massive scale, a grave violation of human rights. For years, UK institutions struggled, often turning a blind eye to the suffering. They struggled to even acknowledge the scale of the problem, allowing it to fester and grow. The victims were mostly young, white British girls from disadvantaged backgrounds, many in state care. Their vulnerability made them easy targets, less likely to be believed or protected. The pattern repeated across the country: vulnerable girls, organised gangs, and a system that failed them. Victims were often blamed for their own abuse, labelled as promiscuous, and dismissed by authorities. Survivors describe feeling utterly alone and betrayed. Reports to police and social workers were ignored or punished. In one case, a 13-year-old girl was arrested while her abusers went free. This victim blaming allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. Social services were underfunded, police undertrained, and disbelief permeated institutions. The safety net was full of holes, and justice was denied for years. The system's neglect created an environment where predators thrived. The ethnicity of many perpetrators, often British Pakistani men, became a source of political discomfort. Officials hesitated to address this, fearing accusations of racism, which led to a culture of silence. This reluctance protected abusers and shifted focus from child safety to community relations. A 2024 audit found police often failed to record suspects' ethnicity, making it impossible to identify patterns. The fear of racism led to a different prejudice. The suffering of victims was ignored to avoid uncomfortable truths. Police and social services failed catastrophically. Reports of grooming were dismissed as teenage misbehavior, not organized crime. Officers lacked training, and social workers were overwhelmed and discouraged from pursuing difficult cases. Victims' accounts were often ignored, and the focus was on their behavior, not the abusers. Agencies failed to share information, leaving children to fall through the cracks. This fragmentation allowed abusers to act with impunity. The result was years of suffering for victims and a betrayal of society's promise to protect its children. The system didn't just fail, it stood in the way of safety. Political leaders avoided the issue for years, fearing accusations of racism or alienating voters. Calls for a national inquiry were ignored and early warnings dismissed. The problem was framed as local, not national, allowing governments to avoid responsibility. Even after the 2014 Rotherham report, political action was slow and insufficient. Only mounting public and international pressure in 2025 forced the government to act. The opposition seized on the issue, and damning audits made inaction impossible. Change came not from proactive leadership, but from political necessity. In 2025, after years of denial and mounting public pressure, the government finally announced a full national inquiry. This decision came after countless campaigns and tireless advocacy from survivors and their allies. The inquiry will specifically focus on group-based child sexual exploitation, a form of abuse that has been systematically overlooked for far too long. The judge-led inquiry will have the power and the crucial mandate to compel testimony from key individuals and demand the release of relevant documents, marking a major step towards accountability and a potential turning point in the fight against child sexual abuse. The government accepted all recommendations stemming from Baroness Casey's comprehensive audit, including the implementation of mandatory recording of suspects' ethnicity to better understand patterns and address potential biases. A formal apology was issued to the victims and survivors, and hundreds of cold cases previously shelved and forgotten will be thoroughly reviewed with renewed determination. The inquiry must centre survivors' voices, ensuring their experiences are heard and inform the process, and demand a fundamental cultural shift within institutions toward greater transparency, accountability, and unwavering child protection. This scandal exposes deep flaws and systemic failures in society. When political sensitivities and institutional self-preservation override the fundamental duty to protect the vulnerable, everyone suffers, and the very fabric of our society is weakened. Learning from these failures is about more than achieving justice for past wrongs. It's about rebuilding trust within our communities and restoring faith in our institutions, and ensuring every child, regardless of their background, is safe and has the opportunity to thrive. The future depends on facing the truth, however painful it may be, no matter how difficult or challenging the path to uncovering it may be.